Thank you. And I think I might stay here because I want to take notes. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy what you hear as much as you enjoy the pizza. Thank you for not going out in the sunshine. I know it was hard. It was hard for us as well. So I want to start by thanking again the fellows, and thank you for having the vision of having us here and talking about this hard topic, but really important topic. It's the intersection of a lot of social injustice and oppression. I liken it to when you take issues around racism, abuse of children, misogyny, sexual violence, and you put them all in a blender and you mix them up, and that's what you end up with, right? So there's a lot of different issues going on, and I was talking to Lynn on the way down about different groups I talk to and different ways that I frame conversations. Like when I talk to teens, I really talk about media literacy and really understanding the messages that media is giving them around young girls being sex objects and young boys being predators and buyers. And these are obviously large stroke generalizations about the media, but really understanding kind of what we're being told about ourselves and our sexuality and our relationships. The idea that Portland is number 2, we were number 2 on one of the FBI stings, but it's not an issue that conveniently you can say, well, that happens in Portland or that happens in Oregon. It's happening in major cities, it's happening in rural areas. There's not one place in the country, and I work nationally with a lot of different jurisdictions where people say, we've totally figured this out. We've figured out how to protect vulnerable children. We figured out how to tamp down people that are predators. We figured out how to address the supply and demand of people that want to buy sex from children and people who are happy to sell the sex of children. So we haven't found a place, and certainly we're not that place. We haven't figured it out. But I will talk to you about the effort that we did and some of the success that we've had and some of the challenges that we've also had. When you're talking about the issue, it's, for me, so really grounded in media, really grounded in messages about our sexuality, about women, about the roles of children, about the roles of men. So really looking at things on this continuum of sexuality and thinking about things like, and I'm sure you'll have opinions about these things, but like in Portland, right near my office, there's a place called Bikini Brew. Right, so we all know about Starbucks or Pete's Coffee or maybe a local shop that you like to go to, but there's also the option of buying coffee from a woman in a bikini. Now, it's not any bikini you've ever seen at a pool, any pool. It's a bikini that you'll see at a strip club, and there's expectations of her as an employee to act in a way that you would not act in any of these other coffee establishments. She earns a different a higher wage, and so there's a question about like what's happening there for her, for a woman in employment, and what's happening there for the customers. The sexuality linked with something as benign as getting your cup of coffee, which is already stimulating enough, right? So then you got to walk up the continuum of, in my mind, the continuum of like Hooters, where we're pairing food with sexuality, where again, we're packaging women in a way that what's valuable about them is their bodies. They're making more money. Women will tell you that work in those environments, those kind of light sex industry environments, like I make more money. I'm paying for law school. I'm paying my bills. I have kids. So marching that all the way up to traditions and rites of passage that men experience and women now too around bachelorette parties and bachelor parties and things that involve oppression of people, whether you go to strip clubs or there's prostitution involved in those celebrations of a rite of passage where you're marrying the person that you love, and so you celebrate that with some act of oppression on another person, and like really thinking about what that's about. So my son would say like, you're raining on the parade, Mom. And I am, because I want you to be, informed consumers. You're right in that age of like bachelor parties and pornography and strip clubs, like you're the market. You're young, you're technologically connected, you're social, you're single, you're partnering. So really thinking about the messages that are coming through in those types of environments. Now with pornography, and I think it's on I have some handouts at the end, but there's a website called yourbrainonporn.org. There's a great video, there's 2 great videos on there. One's a TED Talk called The Great Porn Experiment, and one is called The Adolescent Brain on Porn. And really understanding how the people who are producing pornography are producing it to be addictive. And so watching those videos, understanding what that means, and when people develop an addiction to pornography, the mind, when you watch pornography and you masturbate to it, then something happens chemically in the mind that you then seek to recreate that. It erodes your ability to be in relationship and normal functioning relationships, and it puts the whole value on the orgasm, which you can reach very quickly particularly if you're male, watching pornography. It also makes the mind, it builds on the mind's natural inclination to seek the novel. So if you think about sexual experiences and what you might see in film, and you think about what's novel, pretty soon you're getting into fetish, you're getting into sex with children, you're getting into some things that really are going to get you on a whole side of the criminal code. So, and then certain people, when they watch pornography, will seek to act out. They will seek to put that into real life acting out. And this is where we get an increase in buying sex. And we get from people who are in the sex industry who might say, I choose to be here, this is my job, I enjoy it, are now saying, people are coming to us with pornography experiences and wanting things that are extremely violent. So we're seeing sex assault reports by people in the sex industry who say that they're there by choice are starting to have this increase in sex assault. We're also seeing a huge spike in people seeking children or seeking young people. So whether those are adults that are posting and saying, I'm young, I'm fresh, I'm new in town, or some of these words, or it actually is someone under 18. And the person is predatory and they're seeking someone who's prepubescent or someone who doesn't yet have developed sex, breast, or, so those kind of messages and how those are interrupting when you're seeking a relationship, and a relationship's about all kinds of things, and it may or may not include sex. And when the relationship on porn, that's all it's about. It's all about your own pleasure. So, and it's not necessarily some of the more addictive porn about mutual pleasure. It's about my pleasure, often at your cost. Your cost increase my pleasure. So you get these disturbing, dangerous messages that then spill over into the sex industry. When working on, I'm a collaboration specialist, kind of a fun title, making collaboration special, and bringing together partners that might not work together. So on this topic, there's all kinds of people, you kind of think, who's working with your teens? Who cares about your teens? And not just your teens that are homeless, because certainly those teens are vulnerable. But it's important when you're thinking about a person who's buying sex or selling sex of a teen that you're dealing with a predator. So if a kid is a homeless kid, then their vulnerability is they don't have food, they don't have clothes, they don't have a place to sleep that night. That's what their vulnerability is. And a predator, an adult, will find someone, since our society has failed to provide that for a kid, this person will come along and say, I'll give you a place to sleep, I'll do you a trade, right? And so the kid's in a position where they can't provide that for themselves. That's certainly sexual exploitation. When it becomes, and think of it that way, you'll hear it referred to as survival sex or bartering. And I just don't believe that kids really want to have strangers, have sex with strangers anyway, anyhow that person wants to, with no control over their body, if another person came up and said, I have a shelter and you can come stay here. So that's a form of sexual exploitation. When it becomes commercial is when you've got a third party. So you've got a pimp or an exploiter, a trafficker are the words I like to use, that comes in and says, I'm going to make money off that deal. I'm going to protect you, I'm going to take you in, I'm going to make sure you stay safe, and we're going to make some money together. So you have this teen that's vulnerable, could be vulnerable. One of the things that all have in common, every single one of them, is the same thing that everybody in this room has in common, is that at some point you want to be loved. Not by your parents, not by your church, not by your friends, but loved, romantically loved. You might really crave that in your life. And that when you seek that out, that there's a point in that relationship that you've either had or you will have, hopefully in your life, where you give over and you say, can I trust you? Can I love you? You wouldn't hurt me, right? You're here, like you kind of somehow articulate those shared values about relationship. And for the girl or the boy who's being exploited, they are certainly expressing that desire to be loved. And the exploiter is going to say, yeah, that's what I want. And he's going to give that to her for a week or a month or however long it takes to hook her, to isolate her away from people, to get her under his control, to get her to fall in love. And then there's going to be a trade. Maybe there's going to be a gang rape, maybe there's going to be a beatdown, maybe there's going to be a financial crisis that only her selling her body can solve, but somehow she's going to give back what he's given to her, this unconditional love. Now maybe she's a kid from the foster system and no one's ever loved her, or people have been paid to put her in foster care and act like they love her, or caseworkers might have been nice to her but they only work for her. And so it might be really the first time it feels like someone's loved her. Or maybe she comes from a home that's fully intact and she's just trying to be independent, and this person loves her and that's really special, and he's offering her a love that's different than she's ever had. But that core love, whether it lasted a week or a month or 6 months, is always what she wants to get back to. So if you understand domestic violence and how that acts on an adult mind, this is on a juvenile mind who maybe has never experienced relationships, whose mind is still developing until she's 23, 24. And so when the violence starts and when the raping starts, then it's always, we can get back to this if you would just. We can get back to the love. If once we earn enough money, we're going to live that dream. We just need to earn money, and you can do that for me. So again, that power and control that happens in the situation, and understanding the victim. So understanding what they need legislatively, what they need for housing. It's just a myriad of needs. What do they need restoratively, spiritually, physically, mentally? Tons of needs. So bringing people together that can talk about those needs. Understanding the offenders. So back to the youth. In our society, being homophobic, being racist, the things that we still haven't conquered in our society, those also make these kids vulnerable. So we've got huge overrepresentations of kids with disabilities, queer kids, kids of color. These kids are all overrepresented. When you move over into the exploiter realm, you've got your buyers, you've got your sellers. So on your seller side, you have a huge overrepresentation of men of color. So again, like as you're learning about racial oppression and disproportionate minority contact in the criminal justice system, why so many men, it's not necessarily that more African American or Hispanic men pimp, it's that they get caught and they get prosecuted at different rates. So that's an issue. Now when you get into your buyers, huge overrepresentation of white males. So it's there's just this disturbing racial thing that goes on in the whole buying and selling issue. The third piece, so we've got victims, we've got these offenders, whether they're buyers or sellers, and the third piece to understand, and so you have to kind of address each piece, because if you're doing one, the others are gonna kind of grow. So is demand, is understanding, finding a way, so I work for the government, finding a way as a government employee, as a police, as to bring your community around you and start talking about morality and start talking about why is this happening? Why are there, like in Portland, Oregon, 65 different sex industries in our little city? So if somebody comes to town and says, hey, will you take me to your red light district? I have to drive them all around Portland, because it's everywhere. It's downtown, it's in Southeast, it's on the track, it's at the airport, it's everywhere. Some places are zoned differently or zoned at all, and they have just an area. And it's still problematic. But Portland's got all these sex industry, and because Portland's an older city similar to Eugene, then it's kind of a densely populated. So you can imagine when you have 65 sex industries in town, places where you can reasonably expect to buy sex, whether it's a fantasy club or a lingerie club, which is really a brothel, or it's a strip club, you can reasonably expect the front act might be a strip club, but in the back, people are being sold. That's where the real money gets made. So if you put 65 of those in Portland, you just scatter them on the map, and let's throw in some schools and some parks and some houses. All of a sudden, you've got kids waiting for the bus in front of the strip club. They're going to school across from the fantasy video store. So you get this unintended consequence of sex industry close to where we're trying to live and create families. So when you're talking about collaboration, you have to figure out how to bring those people together and what your goals are, what your common goals are. And it's this delicate balance between everyone doing what they're really good at. So like we don't want the advocates to start going and arresting people, and we certainly don't want citizens to start going out and rescuing these kids or making contact with these folks. We want the cops to be good cops, we want the advocates to be really good advocates, we want the citizens to raise the voice and rally on the city hall and pass legislation and do all those good civic duties. But we want people to understand each other enough to know where they're failing. We want to build enough trust for them to say, I keep arresting these bad guys and I get these kids and I don't have anything to feed them. They're starving. They've got $1,000 in their pocket and they're starving. I need someone to provide food. The police department doesn't have that. The advocate might say, we can work with them and talk to them, but they need to have a place to lay their head at night. So really looking at how we can work together. Now, we talked a little bit, we conversed by email about controversy, right? So early on, it was, even when I was interviewed, it was like, if we could just lock these kids up. And I had a police officer on my interview panel, like, I want to know what you think about locking these kids up. And I said, well, I think as my job as a collaborator to bring all the voices to the table. And he's like, no, not having that. Do you want to lock them up or not? And my answer wasn't glib, it's true, like, I need to bring the voices to the table and create a conversation, but, you know, when you're adults and you're working with these kids, and if you're the cops, and I can't even imagine, like, picking these kids up and they've just been raped and they've, you know, had this horrible experience for days and days, they have no medical care, and then we put them in the shelter and they can just go out the back door because it's not secure, like how that is traumatizing for the police officers, and they might not have that language, they just don't want to keep doing that. These are fathers and mothers that are out there, you know, having first contact with these kids. And then you've got other people, you know, in the advocacy side saying, well, we know that these kids got put in this situation by force and coercion, so now you're going to lock them up and act just like their pimp. How is that helpful? And creating those conversations. You know, well, if we can just give them services, which is like code in the juvenile system for adjudicate them. Like, you cannot get services from the juvenile system unless you're charged. So then we have to charge them. Well, we won't charge them for prostitution. And Portland's pretty proud, like, we don't charge them for prostitution, but they're still going to jail. I mean, we haven't completely cleaned that up, and we certainly haven't taken that law off the books in the state, the ability to lock kids up under prostitution. Or maybe he makes her carry her heroin, or maybe she, and this is often the case, police makes contact with her, and the pimp's told her, you better not tell him your real name. This is what you say. This is what you do. You don't ever give me up. So now she's giving false information to an officer. Maybe she's been taught to fight, so now she's assaulting an officer. These are some pretty good charges. You know, she's going to juvenile. So she's now done a crime. Now, if we're on the federal level in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, all those behaviors, those indicators that we see, those are all part of her trafficking. They're all part of it. At some point, you can't even sort them out because she's so coerced and controlled, so you can't sort them out. So those kinds of discussions are difficult. You know, we've had myriad of success. We have numerous specialty units in Portland. Our agencies all have specialty units. Child welfare has a specialty unit. They now screen these kids in. I've worked with them for 20 years, and they were not always very kind to teenagers, and they really have recognized that these are our kids, and a lot of times, 80% of the time, these are kids that already have involvement in child welfare. We need to take a different look. We need to not say, well, if it's not her care provider harming her, it's not our business, it's the police's. That really, they can statutorily land on that, but they ethically, in Multnomah County, said that's not good enough. We need to start screening these kids in. Now, federally, Health and Human Services is catching up with that, and that's going to be the trend across the country. But what you're going to get is all these kids getting screened in, and all these child welfare folks are like, I don't know what to do with these kids. And these kids are having the next round of kids, right? A lot of times, 16% of them we found in Portland are become pregnant as a result of their trafficking. What am I doing? Okay, so so I think I'm going to pass it off, and just if you have questions, write them down. Lynn's going to get more into like the actual legal stuff because that's not my area. But if you have questions, we really look forward to having a discussion. So thank you.